It started with a heavy pound on the door that didn't ask for permission. At 3 minutes past 6 in the morning, gray light filtered onto my porch, revealing a deputy sheriff holding papers like a weapon. My stomach tightened, but I forced myself not to panic. I looked past him and saw them across the street. My parents were standing in the shadows, watching me like they had bought front-row tickets to my execution. My name is Haley Nelson, and until 3 minutes past 6 in the morning on that gray Tuesday, I thought I owned my life. The sound that woke me was not the polite tap of a neighbor returning a borrowed cup of sugar, or the rhythmic thud of a delivery driver dropping a package. It was a metallic, authoritative pounding that vibrated through the frame of the front door and straight into the floorboards of my bedroom. It was the kind of knock that does not ask for permission to enter. It announces that your permission is no longer relevant. I sat up in bed, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. The silence that followed the pounding was heavy, pregnant with a threat I could not yet name. My first instinct was the primal urge to freeze, to pull the duvet up and pretend I was not home, but life had taught me that ignoring a problem usually gave it time to grow teeth. I threw off the covers, the morning air biting at my bare legs, and grabbed the silk robe from the foot of the bed. I did not run, I walked. Panic is a luxury for people who have someone coming to save them, and I knew, with a sinking certainty in my gut, that no one was coming for me. I moved through the living room, a space I had spent the last 4 years renovating with my own hands. I knew every creak in the hardwood, every brushstroke on the molding. This house was not just a structure, it was the only thing in the world that was entirely mine. I reached the front door and pressed my eye to the peephole. The fisheye lens distorted the world outside, bending the porch pillars and the walkway, but the figure standing on my welcome mat was unmistakably clear. He was wearing a tan uniform with a badge that caught the dull, flat light of dawn, a deputy sheriff. He stood with his feet shoulder-width apart, his hands resting on his belt, his posture radiating a bored but firm patience. In his left hand, he held a clipboard with a stack of papers clipped to it. My breath hitched. Law enforcement at sunrise usually meant a tragedy had occurred, an accident, a death notification. For a split second, I worried about my brother, about a car crash, about something terrible happening to someone I loved. But then my gaze shifted past the deputy, drifting toward the street, and the breath I had been holding solidified into a cold, hard stone in my stomach. Across the street, parked near the community mailbox, was a silver sedan I recognized as intimately as my own face. Standing beside it, half shadowed by the neighbor's oak tree, were 2 figures. They were not crying. They were not rushing toward the house to support me. They were watching. They stood with their arms crossed, leaning slightly against the car door, observing my front porch with the detached curiosity of spectators at a tennis match. It was my mother, Elaine, and my father, Gordon. They were not shocked. They were not afraid. They looked almost proud. The realization washed over me like ice water. This was not an accident. This was a performance, and I was the unwilling lead actress. I unlocked the deadbolt. The sound of the tumbler clicking open seemed deafening in the quiet morning. I opened the door just enough to show my face, keeping one hand on the frame, a subconscious barrier between my sanctuary and the state. "Good morning," the deputy said. His voice was flat, devoid of empathy, reciting a script he had likely spoken 1,000 times before. He looked down at his clipboard, then back up at me. "Are you Haley Nelson?" I tightened the belt of my robe. "I am. What is this about?" He did not answer immediately. He flipped the top page of the document on his clipboard, revealing a dense block of legal text beneath. "Ms. Nelson, I am here to execute a court order. I have a writ of possession for this property." The words floated in the air between us, absurd and impossible. "A what?" "You have the wrong house. Address is 1224 Maplewood Drive," he recited, checking the paper again. "Haley Nelson listed as the occupant. This is an eviction order. Ms. Nelson, the court has granted possession to the plaintiffs, and enforcement is scheduled for today." "Eviction?" I let out a short, incredulous laugh that held no humor. "I own this house. The deed is in my name. I pay the taxes. I pay the insurance. You cannot evict a homeowner." The deputy shifted his weight. He looked tired. He did not want to argue property law on a cold porch before he had finished his first cup of coffee. "Ma'am, I just served the papers. The judgment was entered by the Superior Court last week. It is a default judgment for unlawful detainer." "That is impossible," I said, my voice rising slightly, though I fought to keep it steady. "I was never served with a lawsuit. You cannot have a default judgment if I was never told I was being sued." "The paperwork says otherwise," he said. He extended the clipboard toward me, pointing to a line near the top of the page. "Says here, you were served via substitute service on the 15th of last month." I looked at where his finger was pointing. The text was blurry through my tears of frustration, but I blinked them away. I needed to see. I needed to understand how the world had tilted on its axis while I was sleeping. "Who are the plaintiffs?" I asked, though deep down, in the darkest part of my intuition, I already knew. The deputy hesitated. He looked at the paper, then glanced over his shoulder at the street, where the silver sedan was still parked. He looked back at me, and for the first time, his professional mask slipped just a fraction. There was a flicker of pity in his eyes, which was infinitely worse than his indifference. "Plaintiffs are listed as Elaine Nelson and Gordon Nelson," he said quietly. Hearing their names spoken aloud by a stranger felt like a physical slap. My parents. My parents were evicting me from the home my grandfather had left me. My parents, who had smiled at me at Thanksgiving, who had asked about my job, who had pretended to be family, had filed a lawsuit behind my back to throw me onto the street. They filed an eviction against their own daughter, I stated, the words tasting like ash. "It appears so," the deputy said. "Look, ma'am, the writ is valid, unless you have a stay from a judge. I have to enforce this. You have until 12 noon to vacate the premises." "Noon?" I choked out. "That is 6 hours away. You are giving me 6 hours to pack my entire life?" "That is the procedure," he said, stepping back slightly as if he expected me to lunge at him. "The sheriff's department will return at 12 noon to change the locks and remove any remaining occupants. If you are still here, you will be escorted off the property for trespassing." I looked past him again. My parents had moved closer now. They had crossed the street and were standing at the edge of my driveway, just close enough to hear, just far enough to avoid immediate physical contact. My mother was wearing her favorite beige cardigan, the one she wore to church. Her face was composed, her expression one of tragic necessity, the look she gave when she had to punish a child for their own good. "We tried the easy way. Haley," she called out. Her voice was sweet, melodic, carrying perfectly in the crisp morning air. It was the voice of a martyr. "We asked you to sign the papers." "We asked you to be reasonable." "Reasonable?" I shouted, my control fracturing for a second. "You sued me? You are evicting me?" My father stepped forward. He checked his watch, a gold timepiece he had bought with money he did not really have. He did not look at my face. He looked at the house. He looked at the freshly painted siding, the repaired roof, the equity I had built with my own sweat. "Pack," he said. One word. Simple, brutal. Noon. The deputy looked between us, clearly uncomfortable. He held out the papers. "Here is your copy, Ms. Nelson." I did not take them immediately. My mind was racing, spinning through 1,000 scenarios. If I screamed, I would look unstable. If I cried, I would look weak. If I attacked them, I would go to jail. My parents were counting on my emotional collapse. They expected Haley the daughter, the one who sought their approval, the one who feared their disappointment, to crumble. They expected me to beg. But looking at my father's smug satisfaction, something inside me snapped. It was not a break. It was a hardening. The fear that had gripped me in the bedroom evaporated, replaced by a cold, crystalline clarity. They had planned this. They had timed this. They had brought an armed officer to my door at dawn to humiliate me into submission. I took a deep breath. inhaling the scent of damp earth and betrayal. I looked the deputy in the eye. "Can I see the proof of service?" I asked. My voice was no longer trembling. It was flat, clinical. The deputy blinked, surprised by the sudden shift in my demeanor. Sure. It is the second page." He flipped the page over. I leaned in, not touching the clipboard, just reading. I scanned the document for the proof of service section. There it was. The process server claimed to have delivered the summons to an occupant at my residence, but then my eyes caught the address listed for the service, 1400 block of Oak Street. "That is not my address," I said, pointing at the line. "I haven't lived on Oak Street in 10 years. That was my college apartment." The deputy looked at the address, then looked at the house number on the pillar next to my head. 1224 Maplewood. He frowned. "Well, the court accepted it. The default was entered based on this service." "It is fraudulent service," I said. "They served an address where they knew I did not live, so I would never get the papers, so they could get a default judgment by surprise." "That is a matter for the court," the deputy said, though his tone was less certain now. "I just execute the writ." "I understand," I said. "Hold this right there. Do not move it." "Ma'am?" "I am building a record," I said. I turned and ran back into the entryway. Grabbing my smartphone from the console table, I walked back out onto the porch, barefoot on the cold concrete. "I need to photograph every page of that document," I told the deputy. "I have the right to inspect the warrant you are using to remove me." He shrugged, but he held the clipboard steady. "Go ahead." I raised my phone. My hands were shaking, but I forced them to still. I took a photo of the first page, capturing the case number, the names of the plaintiffs, and the signature of the judge. I flipped the page. I took a close-up photo of the proof of service, ensuring the incorrect Oak Street address was perfectly legible. I took a photo of the date stamp. I took a photo of the declaration of the process server. My mother's voice floated up from the driveway again. "Haley, don't make a scene. Just get your things. We can discuss the rest later." I did not look at her. I did not acknowledge her existence. I was no longer her daughter in this moment. I was a defendant gathering evidence. Click, click, click. I captured the deputy's badge number. I captured the time on my phone screen, 6:15 in the morning. "You have 5 hours and 45 minutes, the deputy said, pulling the clipboard back once I lowered my phone. He tore off the carbon copy and extended it to me. "This is your copy. I suggest you get moving. The eviction crew does not wait." I took the papers. They felt heavy, toxic. "I am not going anywhere," I whispered to myself, but loud enough for him to hear. "Ma'am, if you are here at noon," he started to warn me again. "I heard you." I cut him off. "You have a job to do. So do I." I stepped back and closed the door. I did not slam it. I closed it with a soft, definitive click. I locked the deadbolt. Then I leaned my forehead against the cool wood of the door and listened. I could hear footsteps on the driveway. I could hear my father laughing. A short, barking sound. He thought he had won. He thought the shock and the timeline would crush me. He thought noon was a deadline I could not beat. I looked at the photos on my phone. The image of the fraudulent service address glowed on the screen. It was a lie, a clumsy, arrogant lie, and they had put it on a court document. They wanted a war? They wanted to use the law to bully me? I pushed myself off the door. I walked into the kitchen and placed the eviction papers on the granite island. I did not start packing boxes. I did not look for suitcases. I looked for my car keys and my laptop. My parents had made one critical mistake. They thought they were evicting a scared child. They forgot they were attacking a woman who had built this life from nothing, and I would burn the world down before I let them steal it from me. I looked at the clock on the microwave. 6:18 in the morning. "Game on," I said to the empty room. I stood in the center of my kitchen. The silence of the house pressing against my ears. It was a sharp contrast to the metallic pounding that had shattered the morning only 20 minutes earlier. The deputy was gone. The engine of his cruiser had faded down the street, taking with it the immediate threat of handcuffs. but leaving behind a deadline that hung over my head like a guillotine blade. 12 noon. I ran my hand along the granite countertop. I had installed this myself. I remembered the weight of the stone, the ache in my lower back, the smell of the sealant curing over 3 long days. This house was not just a structure of wood and drywall to me, it was a legacy. It had belonged to my grandfather, a man who had worked 40 years at the steel mill to pay it off, dollar by dollar, when he passed away 5 years ago. The reading of the will had been a tense affair. My parents had sat in the lawyer's office with expectant smiles, already mentally spending the equity. When the attorney read the clause that left the property solely to me, skipping their generation entirely, the air in the room had turned so cold I could feel it on my skin. Grandfather knew them. He knew their history of leveraged loans, of keeping up appearances, of draining accounts to fund vacations they could not afford. He knew that if he left the house to Gordon and Elaine Nelson, it would be sold or mortgaged within 6 months. So he gave it to the one person he knew would keep the roof valid and the taxes paid. Me, for 5 years. I had honored that trust. I spent my weekends stripping layers of 1970s wallpaper, refinishing the original oak floors, and updating the plumbing. I used my own savings. I did not take a dime from them, even when they offered it with strings attached. And there were always strings. That was the Nelson family way. My parents did not operate with open hostility. That was too messy. They operated with a suffocating kind of concern. They called it family responsibility. They called it looking out for me. But it was control disguised as affection. Over the last year, their interest in the house had shifted from casual commentary to an obsessive critique. They would come over for dinner and my father would walk the perimeter, making comments about liability insurance or asset protection. My mother would suggest that a young woman shouldn't handle such a large asset alone. The memory of a conversation from 3 weeks ago surfaced, sharp and clear. We were sitting at this very table. My father had poured himself a glass of wine and slid a document toward me. It was a quitclaim deed, adding their names to the title as joint tenants. "It is for your safety, Haley," he had said, his voice smooth. "If something happens to you, the state takes the house. Probate is a nightmare. If we are on the deed, it transfers seamlessly. We are just thinking of your future." I had pushed the paper back. I told them no. I told them I had a will and a trust, and the house was protected. I watched the warmth drain from my father's eyes instantly. He did not yell. He just folded the paper, put it back in his jacket pocket, and finished his wine in silence. They left early that night. Since then, the texts had been sparse. The calls had been short. I thought they were sulking. I did not realize they were strategizing. Now, standing in the kitchen with the eviction notice on the counter, the pieces clicked together with terrifying precision. They did not want to protect the house for me. They wanted to take it from me. I looked at the clock on the stove. 6:30 in the morning. The courts did not open until 8 o'clock. I had 90 minutes of paralysis before I could make a move, but I refused to freeze. The deputy had been clear, without a judge signing a stay of execution. The sheriff's department would return at 12 noon. That was not a threat. It was procedure. To the law. I was just a squatter refusing to leave. The deputy did not know about the renovations or the grandfather or the betrayal. He only knew what the paper said. I needed paper of my own. I walked to the hallway closet, pushed aside the winter coats, and knelt down to the small biometric safe bolted to the floor. I keyed in the code and heard the heavy click of the lock disengaging. Inside was a fireproof pouch. I pulled it out, clutching it to my chest like a shield. I carried it to the kitchen table and unzipped it. The smell of old paper and legal toner drifted up. I spread the documents out. The original deed, stamped and recorded 5 years ago, the letter of distribution from the probate court, the property tax statements for every year since, all showing paid in full with checks signed by Haley Nelson, the homeowner's insurance policy, active and current. These were the most boring documents in the world, dry and administrative, but in the next few hours, They were the difference between sleeping in my bed and sleeping in my car. I organized them into a timeline: proof of ownership, proof of payment, proof of residency. I grabbed my laptop and pulled up the county tax assessor's website. I printed the current assessment, which still listed me as the sole owner. I printed the payment history. My printer whirred rhythmically, a comforting mechanical sound in the silent house. I poured myself a cup of cold coffee from the pot I had made yesterday and sat down to wait. The minutes dragged. I watched the sun creep higher through the blinds, casting long bars of light across the floor, across the street. The silver sedan was gone. They had left. They had delivered their message and retreated to wait for the fallout. They probably expected me to be frantically packing boxes right now. They expected me to call them, crying, begging for them to call off the dogs. They wanted me to surrender so they could swoop in and save me by taking control. But I was not calling them. I was calling the people who actually held the power. At 7:59, I picked up my phone and dialed the number for the civil court clerk. My hand was steady, but my pulse was thumping in my throat. I listened to the automated greeting, pressing the buttons for the civil division, then the option for existing cases. Clerk of the court, civil division, a woman's voice answered. She sounded tired already. "Good morning," I said. My voice sounded strange to my own ears, calm, professional, detached. It was the voice I used when I had to present bad data to a client at work. "I need information on a case number. I have an eviction notice posted on my door this morning, but I was never served with a lawsuit." "Case number?" she asked, the keystrokes clacking in the background. I read it off the paperwork the deputy had given me. CV-2-49901. There was a pause. The clacking stopped. "Nelson versus Nelson?" "Yes," I said. "I am the defendant, Haley Nelson." "All right, Ms. Nelson. What is your question?" "I need to know the status. The deputy said there is a default judgment. I need to know how that happened." "One moment." The line went silent for a beat. Then she returned. "Yes, default judgment for possession was entered on the 28th. You failed to file a responsive pleading within the statutory time limit." "I did not file a response because I did not know the case existed," I said, gripping the phone tighter. "I was never served." "The file shows proof of service," the clerk stated flatly. She was looking at a screen. She did not care about my truth. Only the data. "Proof of service was filed on the 15th. Substitute service." "Substitute service?" I repeated. "At what address?" I held my breath. This was the key. 1420 Oak Street, she read. "That is an incorrect address," I said quickly. "I have not lived there in 10 years. But wait, substitute service means someone accepted it." "Who accepted the service?" The clerk sighed. The sound of someone who had a long line of people waiting and did not have time for a detective story. But she clicked the mouse. "The return of service says the documents were left with a competent member of the household over the age of 18. "Does it list a name?" I asked. "It says Elaine Nelson." The name hit me in the chest. My mother had not just used my old address. She had physically gone to the location, or claimed to, and accepted the lawsuit meant for me. Pretending to be a member of my household at a house I did not live in. It was absurd. It was clumsy. But it had worked because the court system operates on the assumption that people tell the truth on signed affidavits. "Ma'am," the clerk said, her voice softening just a fraction, likely hearing the silence on my end. "If you want to contest this, you cannot do it over the phone. You need to come down here. If the sheriff is scheduled for noon, you need to file an ex parte application to stay the execution immediately. You have—" She paused. "You have less than 4 hours." "I know," I said. "I am coming now." "Bring your proof," she advised. "If the service was bad, the judge needs to see why." I hung up the phone. The confirmation settled over me, heavy and suffocating. This was not a misunderstanding. This was a tactical strike. They knew that if they served me properly, I would fight. I would hire a lawyer. I would win because the deed was in my name. So they engineered a scenario where I could not fight, They created a ghost lawsuit, served it to themselves, waited out the clock for me to fail to respond, and then got a judge to sign a default order. They used the machinery of the state to break into my home, and the goal was clear. It was not just about kicking me out, it was about possession. Once they were inside, once the locks were changed and my furniture was on the curb, the burden of proof would shift. I would be the one on the outside looking in, trying to sue my way back into my own property while they lived there. They would claim I was unstable. They would claim I had agreed to leave. They would use the physical reality of their presence in the house to rewrite the history of ownership. They wanted to create chaos. In chaos, the loudest person usually wins, and my parents were very loud. I looked at the fireproof pouch. I looked at the photos on my phone of the fraudulent service document. I grabbed my car keys. I did not bother to change out of my jeans and sweater. I put on my coat, shoved the documents into my leather tote bag, and walked to the door. I paused for a second, looking at the living room. The morning light was hitting the refinished floors, turning them a warm, honey gold. "I will be back," I said to the house. It was a promise. I locked the door, checked it twice, and marched to my car. I was not just fighting for a building, I was fighting for the truth. And as I backed out of the driveway, checking the time, 8:15, I knew the race was on. I had 3 hours and 45 minutes to undo a lie that my parents had spent weeks constructing. I drove toward the courthouse, my hands gripping the wheel, my mind sprinting ahead to the confrontation that was waiting for me in Department 12. They wanted a helpless daughter. They were about to meet a furious homeowner. The Ridge County Civil Courthouse was a monolith of beige concrete and tinted glass, designed to look imposing and managing to look merely exhausting. I pulled my car into the public parking structure at 8:20 in the morning, the tires screeching slightly on the polished concrete as I navigated the turns with a speed that bordered on reckless. I found a spot on the 4th level, grabbed my tote bag, and ran toward the elevator. The air inside the courthouse smelled of floor wax, stale coffee, and anxiety. I moved through the security checkpoint, placing my bag on the belt and walking through the metal detector. My watch read 8:25. I had 3 hours and 35 minutes before the sheriff returned to my door. Every second I stood in line felt like a physical weight being added to my shoulders. I was the first person at the civil clerk's window when the shutters rolled up with a metallic rattle, behind the thick glass partition. A woman with reading glasses on a chain around her neck looked up. She had the weary expression of someone who had seen every variety of human desperation and was no longer impressed by any of it. "Next," she said, her voice amplified by a small speaker that hissed with static. I stepped up, sliding the piece of paper with the case number under the glass gap. "I need to see the file for this case immediately," I said. "And I need to file an emergency ex parte application to stay in eviction." The clerk adjusted her glasses and pulled the paper toward her. She typed the number into her terminal, CV2 49901. I watched her eyes scan the screen. She clicked once, then twice. Her expression did not change, but her posture stiffened slightly. She looked from the screen to me, then back to the screen. "ID?" she requested. I slid my driver's license under the glass. She compared the photo to my face, then looked at the name on the screen. "You are the defendant?" she asked. "Yes. I was never served. I found out about this case 2 hours ago when a deputy showed up at my door." She nodded slowly, not agreeing, just acknowledging the statement. She turned her chair and walked to the large rotating file system behind her. It took her 2 minutes to find the physical folder, a red manila jacket that looked far too thin to contain the destruction of my life. She brought it back and placed it on the counter, opening it flat. "You can view it here," she said. "You cannot take it from the window." I leaned in, my heart pounding against my ribs. The top document was the writ of possession, the same one the deputy had held. Underneath that was the request for default judgment, and underneath that was the proof of service. I stared at it. The text was crisp and black. The process server had checked the box for substitute service, and there, in the line for name of person documents were left with, was the name I expected but still dreaded seeing. Elaine Nelson. Relationship. Mother/landlord. I felt a surge of bile in my throat. My mother had not just accepted the papers. She had identified herself as the landlord on the service form. She had orchestrated the service to herself, essentially suing me and then shaking her own hand to acknowledge receipt. "Look at the complaint," I whispered to myself. Flipping the page. The document was titled, "Complaint for Unlawful Detainer," in the section describing the relationship between plaintiff and defendant. A box was checked. Landlord-tenant. I read the narrative typed in the description field. Defendant, Haley Nelson, is a holdover tenant under a written month-to-month lease agreement dated January 1st of last year. Defendant has failed to pay rent for 3 months and refuses to vacate. "A lease?" I said aloud, my voice echoing slightly in the quiet lobby. "There is no lease. I own the house." I flipped to the exhibits attached to the back of the complaint. Exhibit A. It was a standard residential lease agreement, the kind you can buy at an office supply store for $5. It listed Elaine and Gordon Nelson as landlords and me as tenant. The monthly rent was listed as $2,000. And at the bottom of the last page, there was a signature. I stared at the blue ink scrawl above the line marked tenant. It read, Haley Nelson. But it was wrong. The slant was too vertical. The loop on the Y was too tight. It looked like someone had practiced my signature a dozen times, but could not quite capture the natural flow of my hand. It looked like the signature on my high school report cards, the ones my mother used to sign when I forgot. It was a clumsy, arrogant forgery. They had not even tried to make it look professional. They had just assumed no one would ever look close enough to challenge it. My hands were shaking, not from fear anymore, but from a rage so pure it felt like clarity. They had forged a lease. They had fabricated an entire legal reality where I was not a homeowner who had renovated a property with her own money, but a deadbeat tenant who hadn't paid rent. "This is a forgery," I said, looking up at the clerk. "This signature is fake. This entire lease is a lie. I have the deed to this house in my bag right now." The clerk looked at me. For a moment, she remained the impassive bureaucrat. Then, she glanced around the lobby to ensure no supervisors were hovering. She leaned forward, her voice dropping to a near whisper. "The judge looks at the file. Honey," she said, "if you are filing a motion to set aside the default, you need to show the judge why the judgment is wrong. Do not just tell me, highlight that." She slid a yellow highlighter under the glass. I looked at her, stunned by the small act of grace. "Thank you. You have a lease attached here that says you are a tenant," she continued, speaking low and fast. "If you have a deed that says you are the owner, that contradicts the jurisdiction of this court. Eviction court is for renters. If you own it, this case should not exist. But right now, the computer says you are a tenant because that paper says so. You need to file a motion to stay execution ex parte. That means emergency. And a motion to vacate the judgment." "I don't have a lawyer," I said, uncapping the highlighter. "I don't know the format." "We have packets," she said, pointing to a rack of forms on the side wall. "Fill out the stay of execution first. That stops the sheriff. Then the vacate. Attach copies of your deed. Attach a declaration. That is your story. Write down exactly what you told me. The service was bad. The lease is fake. You own the home." I grabbed the packet of forms. I retreated to a small wooden table in the corner of the lobby. I checked the time, 8:45. I wrote with a ferocity that nearly tore the paper. I filled in the case number. I checked the boxes for improper service and fraud in the declaration section. I wrote in clear, block letters. I am the sole owner of the property. The plaintiffs are my parents. I never signed a lease. The signature on Exhibit A is a forgery. The service of process was accepted by the plaintiff herself at an address where I do not reside. I pulled the documents from my fireproof pouch. I made photocopies at the coin-operated machine in the corner, feeding quarter after quarter into the slot. I attached the copy of my grant deed. the tax bill, and the photo of the proof of service with the wrong address. I highlighted the forged signature on the copy of the lease. Next to it, I placed a copy of my driver's license signature and wrote, "Comparison" in bold ink. I ran back to the window. It was 9:15. The clerk took the stack of papers. She stamped them with a heavy, rhythmic thud, thud, thud. Filed. "Department 12, she said, handing me a stamped set. "Judge Marin Klein, go to the 3rd floor, room 302, give this to the bailiff or the judicial assistant. Tell them it is an emergency stay request. The lockout is at noon. So run." I did not wait for the elevator this time. I took the stairs, taking them 2 at a time, my breath burning in my lungs. Department 12 was at the end of a long, polished hallway. The double doors were heavy oak. I pushed through them into the courtroom. It was empty of spectators, but the judge was not on the bench yet. A bailiff stood by the side wall, and a woman sat at a large desk to the right of the judge's elevated platform. She was surrounded by stacks of files. This was the judicial assistant. I walked up to the railing, the bar that separates the public from the legal players. "Excuse me," I said, trying to keep my voice steady, though I was winded. "I just filed this emergency motion. The sheriff is scheduled to lock me out at noon today. I need a stay." The judicial assistant looked up. She was a woman in her 50s with sharp, intelligent eyes and a no-nonsense haircut. She reached out a hand without a word. I passed the file over the railing. She looked at the clock on the wall. 9:25. "Judge takes the bench at 10, she said. "I will put this on top." She opened my file. She scanned the first page, the motion to stay. She flipped to my declaration. She stopped when she saw the copy of the deed I had attached. She looked at the grant deed. Then she reached for the court's file, the red folder the clerk had sent up, and opened the complaint. She looked at the lease in the complaint. Then she looked at the deed in my motion. "Owner versus tenant," she muttered. She flipped back to the proof of service in the court file. She saw the name Elaine Nelson listed as the person who accepted service. Her eyebrows shot up. She looked at me, really looked at me. For the first time, it was a look of appraisal. She was realizing that this was not a standard non-payment case. "You are claiming you were never served because the plaintiff served herself?" she asked. "Yes, ma'am," I said. "And she served it at an address I haven't lived at since college." The assistant let out a short, sharp breath through her nose. She picked up a stamp and hit my paperwork. "Received." Then she turned back to the court's file, the one my parents had filed. She flipped past the complaint, past the fake lease, toward the very back of the folder. Her hand paused. She frowned, squinting at a document that was stapled to the inside back cover of the file folder. I watched her eyes narrow. She leaned in closer, reading the fine print. The air in the courtroom seemed to drop a few degrees. She was seeing something I had not seen downstairs. The clerk at the window had shown me the complaint and the service, but she hadn't flipped to the very back. The judicial assistant looked up at me, and her expression had changed from administrative efficiency to something darker. It was concern. "Ms. Nelson," she said, her voice low, barely carrying across the empty room. "You said you own the house?" "Yes," I said. "I attached the deed." "The deed from 5 years ago," she corrected. "That is the current deed," I insisted. She hesitated. She looked at the bailiff, then back at me. She shouldn't have been giving me information. Her job was to manage the calendar, but the discrepancy in front of her was too glaring to ignore. "There is one more exhibit attached to the default judgment request," she said, tapping the file with her fingernail. The sound was sharp, like a warning shot. "It was filed separately, 2 weeks after the complaint." "What is it?" I asked, gripping the wooden railing. "Another fake lease?" She shook her head slowly. Her eyes were locked on mine, urgent and serious. "No," she said. "It is not a lease, and it is not just an eviction anymore." She didn't finish the sentence, but the tone of her voice sent a chill racing down my spine that had nothing to do with the courtroom's air conditioning. Whatever was in that file, whatever my parents had slipped into the record while I was sleeping, was worse than a lie about rent. It was something permanent. "Sit down, Ms. Nelson," she commanded gently. "Do not leave this room. I am taking this to the judge in chambers right now." She grabbed the file and stood up, disappearing through the heavy door behind the judge's bench. Leaving me alone in the gallery with the echo of her warning ringing in my ears, not just an eviction, I sat on the hard wooden bench, clutching my bag. My hands were cold. The clock on the wall ticked forward. 9:30, 2.5 hours left, and suddenly, the fake lease felt like the least of my problems. The judicial assistant returned from the judge's chambers, her face unreadable. She did not hand me back the file. Instead, she walked to the edge of the bar, her heels clicking sharply on the linoleum floor, and motioned for me to approach. I stood up, my legs feeling heavy, and walked to the wooden railing that separated the spectators from the participants. "The judge is reviewing the file," she said. Her voice dropped to a hush that barely registered above the hum of the air conditioning. "But you need to know what you are walking into. The exhibit attached to the default judgment request, the one you haven't seen, is a grant deed. Specifically, a quitclaim deed." I stared at her, the words taking a moment to rearrange themselves into meaning. A quitclaim deed? "It purports to transfer title from Haley Nelson to Elaine and Gordon Nelson," she said. "Dated 2 weeks ago, recorded the same day." The world seemed to tilt. The fake lease was an insult. This was an execution. A lease merely claimed I was a bad tenant. A quitclaim deed meant I was no longer the owner. They had not just sued me for eviction. They had stolen the house on paper before they ever filed the lawsuit. They had forged my signature on a deed, walked it into the county recorder's office, and transferred my property to themselves. I felt a cold sensation bloom behind my ribs, a physical drop in temperature that spread outward to my fingertips. My first impulse was to scream, to pound on the railing and demand that someone arrest them. I wanted to vomit. I wanted to cry. But then I remembered my mother's voice from the driveway. "She is unstable. If I broke down now, if I started shouting about theft and forgery with tears running down my face, I would look exactly like the unstable daughter they were painting me to be. I would look like a woman who had lost her mind, not a woman who had lost her house." I took a deep breath, forcing the air down into my diaphragm. I relaxed my jaw. I smoothed the front of my coat. "Thank you," I said. My voice was terrifyingly calm. "I need to go downstairs to the recorder's office. How much time do I have before the judge takes the bench?" "Judge Klein will call the calendar at 10 o'clock, she said, checking her watch. "You have 20 minutes. Do not be late." I turned and walked out of the courtroom. I did not run. I walked with the purposeful stride of someone who had business to attend to. I took the elevator down to the first floor, where the county recorder's office was located. It was a different world down here. Quiet, smelling of dust and archival paper. I went to the self-service kiosk, a row of computer terminals where the public could search property records. I typed in my address. The screen refreshed. There it was, the most recent entry. Document type, grant deed, grantor, Haley Nelson, grantee, Elaine Nelson, Gordon Nelson, recording date, January 24th. I clicked on the image. The document filled the screen. It was a standard form, the kind you can download from the internet. The property description was correct, and at the bottom, there was my signature again. It was the same shaky, vertical scrawl that was on the fake lease. Next to it was the stamp of a notary public I had never heard of. I looked at the date again. January 24th. The date punched through the fog of my panic like a beacon. January 24th was a Tuesday. It was the day of the quarterly business review at my office. I closed my eyes, letting the memory wash over me. I remembered that day vividly, because it had been a nightmare of a different sort. I work as a senior data analyst for Crestline Analytics Group. We handle sensitive financial data, which means our security protocols are military grade. On the day of the quarterly review, we were in a lockdown session. I had arrived at 7 in the morning to prep the slide deck. I had not left the building for lunch. We ordered sandwiches in. I had not left until 7 in the evening. I was in a secured facility, 40 miles away from the notary's office listed on this deed. At the exact moment I was allegedly signing my house away, I pulled out my phone. My hands were steady now. This was data. I understood data. Data did not lie. People did. I dialed the number for the Security Operations Center at Crestline. I knew the number by heart. It was on the back of my badge. "Security, this is Mike," a voice answered. "Mike, this is Haley Nelson, ID number 4429, I said. "I need an immediate favor. It is an emergency." "Hey, Haley." Mike's tone was casual. "Locked yourself out of the server room again?" "No," I said, cutting him off. "I need you to pull my access logs for January 24th. I need the badge in time, the badge out time, and any internal door swipes in between. And if you have the parking garage camera footage of my car entering and leaving, I need that preserved." Mike paused. The casualness evaporated from his voice. He heard the steel in my tone. "Haley, pulling logs requires a ticket. Preserving footage requires a request from legal or HR. What is going on?" "I am currently at the Ridge County Courthouse," I said. "My parents have forged a deed claiming I signed over my house to them on January 24th. I need to prove I was in the building all day. I am about to go before a judge. If I do not have proof, I lose my home in 2 hours." There was a silence on the other end. "Send me the case number," Mike said. His voice was no longer friendly. It was formal, professional. He was switching into incident response mode. "I will pull the raw logs now and email them to you as a preliminary report. I will flag the video for preservation so it does not get overwritten. Do you have an attorney?" "I am representing myself," I said. "Okay. Check your email in 5 minutes. I have your back." "Thank you." "Mike," I hung up. I took a photo of the deed on the kiosk screen, zooming in on the notary's stamp. Sienna Hart, commission number 219004. I noted the name. Then I printed the document summary from the kiosk receipt printer. I walked back to the elevators. I checked the time, 9:55. When I pushed through the double doors of Department 12 again, the room had changed. It was no longer empty. The gallery had filled with a smattering of lawyers and nervous tenants, and there, in the front row, were my parents. They had changed clothes since the morning. My father was wearing a suit that was slightly too large for him, giving him the appearance of a humble, weary man trying his best. My mother was wearing a soft blue floral dress and a gray cardigan. She sat with her hands clasped in her lap, her shoulders hunched slightly. She looked fragile. She looked like a mother who had spent nights weeping over a wayward child. Sitting between them was a man in a sharp navy suit. He had a leather briefcase and the polished, bored look of a hired gun, their attorney. My stomach twisted. They had not just come to watch. They had come to win. They had hired a professional to streamline the destruction of my life. I walked down the center aisle. I did not look at the floor. I looked straight ahead at the judge's empty chair. As I passed their bench, I felt their eyes on me. "Haley," my mother whispered. It was a stage whisper, loud enough for the attorney to hear. "Honey, please, just come sit with us. We can fix this." I did not turn my head. I walked past them to the defendant's table and set my bag down. I took out my folder, the one with the deed, the tax records, and the newly printed summary from the kiosk. I sat down. I checked my email. A message from Security No Reply had just arrived. Subject: Access Log Report. Nelson. H. I opened it. It was a spreadsheet. 7:02 a.m. Main entrance. 7:15 a.m. Server room B. 12:30 p.m. Cafeteria. It was a perfect digital breadcrumb trail of my existence. The bailiff shouted. "All rise!" Judge Maren Klein swept into the room. She was a woman with graying hair pulled back into a severe bun and glasses that magnified her eyes. She did not look happy. She sat down, adjusted her robe, and looked at the docket. "Line 1, she said. "Nelson versus Nelson. Emergency ex parte application to stay execution. Ready for the plaintiff," the attorney in the navy suit said, standing up smoothly. "Robert Vance, representing Elaine and Gordon Nelson." "Ready," I said, standing up. My voice did not shake. "State your name," the judge said, looking at me. "Haley Nelson, defendant." Judge Klein looked over her glasses at the attorney. "Mr. Vance." "Counsel, I have an application here claiming improper service and fraud, and I see a default judgment entered last week. Your clients are moving to evict their daughter?" Mr. Vance buttoned his jacket. He smiled a small, sympathetic smile. "Your Honor, this is a very difficult situation for the family. My clients have tried to be patient, but this is a simple landlord-tenant matter. The defendant has not paid rent in months. The lease is clear. We obtained a valid default judgment because she failed to respond. We are simply asking to enforce the court's order. There is nothing extraordinary here." "Nothing extraordinary?" I thought. "You are trying to steal a house." I looked at my parents. My father was nodding solemnly at the lawyer's words. My mother dabbed at her dry eyes with a tissue. They were perfect. They were selling the narrative that I was the problem, the leech, the burden they had finally been forced to cut loose. And then the realization hit me with the force of a physical blow. They knew the quitclaim deed was fake. They knew the lease was fake, but they also knew that proving title fraud in civil court could take years. A quiet title action, the lawsuit to prove who owns a house, is slow, expensive, and technical. But an eviction? An eviction is fast. It is designed to move at the speed of light. If they could frame this as a simple landlord-tenant matter, the court would focus only on possession. "Did you pay rent?" "No." "Get out." They wanted to use the speed of the eviction court to bypass the scrutiny of the title court. They wanted to get me out of the house today, change the locks, and then, when I tried to sue them later to get the house back, they would already be inside. They would be the ones answering the door. They would be the owners in possession, and I would be the crazy daughter claiming forgery from the sidewalk. They were weaponizing the system's efficiency against me. "Mr. Vance continued, his voice smooth as oil. "The defendant's motion is a delay tactic. Your Honor, she claims fraud, but she offers no proof other than her own word. We have a signed lease. We have a signed proof of service. We have a recorded deed. The record is clear." Judge Klein looked at me. "Ms. Nelson?" I stood up straighter. I felt the phone in my pocket vibrating with the weight of the security logs. I felt the paper of the original deed in my folder. "It is not a simple landlord-tenant matter, Your Honor," I said, "because I am not a tenant, and they are not the landlords. We have a deed." "Mr. Vance interrupted gently, holding up a paper. "A deed recorded 2 weeks ago," Judge Klein said, cutting him off. She looked down at the file, the one the judicial assistant had flagged. "I see that." The judge's eyes flicked to the parents. She held their gaze for a second too long. It was the look of a predator noticing a disturbance in the wind. "Ms. Nelson," the judge said to me, "you allege you were never served." "I was not, Your Honor," I said, "and I did not sign that deed." "Those are serious allegations," the judge said. "Mr. Vance is right. The court relies on the documents in the file. A notary seal carries a presumption of validity, and a security camera carries a presumption of truth," I said. The courtroom went quiet. "Mr. Vance frowned. My father shifted in his seat. "I have evidence," I said. "Not just my word." Judge Klein leaned back in her chair. She looked at the clock. It was 10:15. The sheriff was coming in 1 hour and 45 minutes. "Then let's see it," the judge said. "Step forward." I walked to the table. I saw my mother look at my father. Her mask of concern slipped for a fraction of a second, replaced by a flash of genuine, sharp fear. They thought I was going to cry. They thought I was going to beg. They did not know I had spent the last hour building a trap. "Proceed," Judge Klein said. Judge Maren Klein did not look up immediately. She sat high on the bench, flanked by the American flag and the state seal, her eyes scanning the file that lay open before her. The silence in Department 12 was heavy, broken only by the rhythmic, indifferent typing of the court reporter. I stood at the defendant's table, my hands clasped so tightly behind my back that my knuckles ached. To my left, at the plaintiff's table, my parents and Mr. Vance sat in a tableau of respectful anticipation. They looked like a Norman Rockwell painting of a family seeking justice. I looked like a woman who had run a red light to get here. Which was not entirely inaccurate. The judge finally raised her head. She did not look at the lawyers. She looked at the papers. Then she looked at me. And then she looked at my parents. There was a frown etched between her eyebrows, a deep vertical line that suggested she had found a loose thread in a sweater and was deciding whether or not to pull it. "I have reviewed the emergency application to stay execution of the writ," Judge Klein said. Her voice was a low contralto, authoritative and dry. "And I have reviewed the request for default judgment entered last week. There are inconsistencies." Mr. Vance stood up, buttoning his suit jacket with a practiced, confident motion. "Your Honor, if I may, the default was entered properly." The defendant failed to answer the complaint within the statutory 5-day period. "We are simply here to facilitate the transfer of possession. The sheriff is scheduled for 12 noon. "I am aware of the schedule. Counsel," Judge Klein cut him off, her eyes narrowing slightly. "I am more interested in how we arrived at that schedule. Ms. Nelson denies service of process." She turned her gaze to me. It was not a warm look, but it was an open one. "Ms. Nelson, you claim you were never served with this lawsuit." "That is correct, Your Honor," I said. My voice was steady, clearer than I expected. "I was not served personally. I was not served by mail. I found out about this case at 6 o'clock this morning when a deputy sheriff knocked on my door to evict me." "The file contains a proof of service," the judge noted, tapping the document with a manicured fingernail. "It indicates substitute service was effectuated on the 15th of last month." "Your Honor, if you look at the proof of service," I said, pointing to the copy in my hand, "you will see 2 critical errors. First, the address. The process server went to 1420 Oak Street. I have not resided at that address for 10 years. It was a rental I lived in during college." Mr. Vance cleared his throat. "Your Honor, the plaintiffs believed in good faith that the defendant was staying at the Oak Street property. It was her last known address." "Last known address?" I shot back, breaking protocol to look directly at him. "My parents, your clients, were standing on my front lawn at Maplewood Drive this morning. They have been to my house for Christmas. They know exactly where I live. They chose an old address on purpose to ensure I never saw the papers." Judge Klein held up a hand to silence me, but her eyes shifted to Mr. Vance. "Counsel, explain to me why your clients would serve a lawsuit to an address a decade old when the property they are trying to recover, the premises listed in this very complaint, is on Maplewood Drive? Usually, one serves the tenant at the unit they are occupying." Mr. Vance shifted his weight. He was a good lawyer, but he was working with bad facts. "Your Honor, as the complaint states, the defendant has been transient. My clients were unsure of her physical location on that specific day, so they utilized substitute service at a location associated with her credit profile." "Transient?" I repeated, unable to help myself. "I have lived in the same house for 5 years. I have held the same job for 4. "Ms. Nelson, let the court speak," Judge Klein warned. Though her tone lacked heat, she looked back at the proof of service. "Let us look at the second issue. Substitute service requires the documents to be left with a competent member of the household or a person apparently in charge at the office. Who accepted this service? Counsel?" Mr. Vance hesitated. It was a pause that lasted only a second, but in a courtroom, a second is an eternity. "The documents were accepted by an adult occupant." "Name?" the judge demanded. "Elaine Nelson," Vance said. The judge stopped moving. She froze, her pen hovering over the page. She slowly lowered her chin, looking over the rims of her glasses at the plaintiff's table. Elaine Nelson, Judge Klein repeated. The plaintiff? Yes, Your Honor. So, let me understand this, the judge said, her voice dropping to a dangerous, conversational volume. The plaintiff, your client, went to an address where the defendant does not live, handed the lawsuit to herself, and then signed the proof of service claiming she accepted it on behalf of the defendant? The courtroom was silent. Even the court reporter paused. Under the Code of Civil Procedure, substitute service is valid if, Vance began, trying to recite the statute. Do not quote the code to me, Mr. Vance, Judge Klein snapped. Did your client sign as the occupant? She did, Vance admitted, his slick demeanor cracking. She was present at the property. Why? The judge turned her full attention to my mother. Mrs. Nelson, stand up. My mother stood up slowly. She smoothed her dress. Looking small and fragile, she looked at the judge with wide, watery eyes. We were just trying to do the right thing. Your Honor? Why did you accept service on behalf of the defendant? Judge Klein asked. You are the one suing her. You cannot serve yourself. We were protecting the property, my mother said, her voice trembling. She gestured vaguely toward me. Haley, she is not well. She has been unstable lately. We didn't want to upset her with a confrontation. We thought if we handled the paperwork quietly, we could get the judgment and then help her move into a care facility. We tried the easy way. I felt the blood rush to my face. Unstable, care facility. It was a lie so bold it took my breath away. They were painting a picture of a mental health crisis to justify a procedural crime. I am not unstable, I said, my voice sharp. I work 40 hours a week. I pay my own bills. I have never been hospitalized or diagnosed with any condition that would require a care facility. She is in denial, my father added from the table. Speaking for the first time, his voice was deep, authoritative, the voice of a weary patriarch. We are just trying to help our daughter. Judge Klein looked at them. She looked at the performance. Then she looked down at the documents I had filed. That is not an answer, the judge said coldly to my mother. You cannot cure a defect in service by claiming the defendant is unstable. If she is incompetent, you petition for guardianship. You do not fake a service of process to get a quick eviction. It was not faked, my mother insisted, a tear slipping down her cheek. I was there. At a house she does not own or rent? Judge Klein asked. She shook her head. Ms. Nelson, you have submitted exhibits with your motion? Yes, Your Honor, I said, stepping forward. I have my driver's license, issued 3 years ago. Listing the Maplewood address, I have my current utility bill from this month, I have my property tax statement from the county. All of them show I live at Maplewood. There is no ambiguity. I handed the clerk the originals. She walked them up to the bench. Judge Klein flipped through them rapidly. The address on the driver's license matches the property in question, the judge stated for the record. The service at Oak Street is defective on its face. The fact that the plaintiff accepted it renders it highly suspect, if not fraudulent. Mr. Vance tried to intervene. Your Honor, even if service was technicality flawed, the underlying facts remain. The defendant is a holdover tenant. She has no right to possession. The deed. Yes, Judge Klein interrupted. The deed. She reached into the back of the file, pulling out the document the judicial assistant had warned me about, the quitclaim deed. She held it up. The light from the ceiling fixtures reflected off the glossy paper. This document, the judge said, was recorded 2 weeks ago. It purports to transfer title from Haley Nelson to Elaine and Gordon Nelson. Correct, Mr. Vance said, looking relieved to be back on what he thought was solid ground. The defendant signed the property over to her parents, since she is no longer the owner. She became a tenant at will. When she stopped paying rent, we moved to evict. It is a straightforward progression. Judge Klein looked at the signature on the deed. Then she looked at the signature on my driver's license, which sat on her desk. She squinted. Ms. Nelson, the judge said, looking at me. Do you see this document? I do, Your Honor. Did you sign this? The question hung in the air. This was the pivot point. If I said yes, I was a tenant. If I said no, I was accusing my parents of a felony. There was no middle ground. There was no misunderstanding. I looked at my parents. My mother was gripping a tissue, watching me with a look that was half pleading, half threatening. "Don't do it," her eyes said. "Don't you dare shame us." My father stared straight ahead, his jaw set in granite. I looked back at the judge. "No, Your Honor," I said clearly. "I did not sign that deed. That is not my signature." "She forgets," my mother blurted out. "She forgets things." "I do not forget signing away a $500,000 asset," I said, keeping my eyes on the judge. "And I certainly didn't do it 2 weeks ago." "The deed is notarized," Mr. Vance argued. "A notary public, an officer of the state, witnessed the signature. That carries a presumption of law that is difficult to overcome with a simple denial." Judge Klein nodded slowly. "Mr. Vance is correct. Miss Nelson, a notarized document is powerful evidence. You are claiming this is a forgery?" "I am claiming it is a fabrication," I said. "I never met that notary. I was never in her presence." "Do you have proof?" the judge asked. "Beyond your memory?" I felt the stack of papers in my folder. The email from Mike at security, the access logs, the timeline. I knew I had the winning card, but I also knew that today, right now, the goal was just to stop the sheriff. I needed to give her enough doubt to issue the stay, but save the knockout punch for the trial where the notary would have to testify. "I do," I said. "I can prove I was not present for the notarization. I was at my place of employment, in a secure facility, 40 miles away. At the time this document was allegedly signed. I have badge access logs and camera footage being preserved as we speak." Mr. Vance scoffed. "Your Honor, this is fantastical. Badge logs?" "It is verifiable," I said. Judge Klein looked at me. She saw the set of my jaw. She saw the lack of hesitation. Then she looked at my parents. She saw the way my father's hand had moved to cover my mother's on the table, a gesture of restraint, not comfort. "The lockout is scheduled for noon," Judge Klein said, checking the clock. It was 10:30. "I am not going to let the sheriff throw a woman out of her home based on a service of process that the plaintiff signed herself, and a deed that is being challenged as a forgery with an offer of alibi evidence." She grabbed her stamp. "Mr. Vance," she said, her voice hard, "your clients are playing a dangerous game." "Your Honor, sit down," she ordered. She signed the paper in front of her with a sharp, aggressive stroke. "Motion to stay execution is granted," she declared. "The writ of possession is recalled effectively immediately. The default judgment is set aside pending a hearing on the merits." My knees felt weak with relief, but I locked them. I did not smile. "We are going to set this for a full evidentiary hearing," Judge Klein continued. "And Ms. Nelson, if you are claiming forgery, you had better bring that evidence, because if you are wasting my time, you will pay for the other side's attorney fees." "I will bring it," I promised. "And Mr. Vance," the judge added, lowering her glasses, "if I find out that this court has been used to facilitate a fraud, if I find out that deed is not legitimate, I will refer this entire file to the district attorney. Do I make myself clear?" "Yes, Your Honor," Vance said, his voice tight. "Get the order to the sheriff." Judge Klein told me. "You have 90 minutes. "Thank you, Your Honor." I grabbed the paper from the bailiff. I did not look at my parents. I turned on my heel and walked out of the courtroom, leaving them sitting in the wreckage of their easy way. The war was not over, but the ambush had failed. The ink on the order signed by Judge Klein was still wet when I pushed through the heavy double doors of Department 12. I held the paper in both hands, treating it like a fragile explosive that might detonate if I folded it the wrong way. It was a single sheet of standard court stock, but it possessed the weight of a shield, the stay of execution. It meant the clock had stopped. I leaned against the cool plaster wall of the corridor, pulled out my phone, and took a high-resolution photo of the order. My fingers moved with the muscle memory of a person who had spent the last 4 hours in survival mode. I opened my text thread with the deputy sheriff, the number he had called me from earlier when I asked for his dispatch contact. I attached the photo. I added 3 words: "Judge granted stay." The response came within 30 seconds, accompanied by the 3 vibrating buzzes that signaled a call. I answered. "Deputy Miller," I said. "I got the image. Ms. Nelson." His voice came through the speaker. It sounded different than it had at 6 o'clock in the morning. The bureaucratic flatness was gone, replaced by an audible exhale of relief. "I just verified it with the court clerk in the system. The writ is recalled. I am calling off the civil unit now. No one is coming to your door at noon." "Thank you," I said. It was strange to thank the man who had threatened to evict me, but I knew he was just the hammer, not the hand swinging it. "Do I need to post a copy on the door?" "Keep a copy with you," he advised. "But we are standing down. You are safe for today." "Safe for today," I repeated. It was not a victory. It was a ceasefire. I hung up the phone and pushed myself off the wall. I needed to get to the recorder's office before the adrenaline crash left me shaking on the floor. But as I turned toward the elevators, I saw them. My parents were standing near the water fountain, huddled in a tight orbit with Mr. Vance. The lawyer looked annoyed, checking his watch and tapping on his briefcase, clearly calculating the billable hours he had just wasted on a botched ambush. But my parents were not looking at him. They were looking at me. My mother, Elaine, had dropped the fragile, weeping persona she had worn inside the courtroom. Her posture was rigid, her jaw set in a hard line that I recognized from my childhood. The look she wore right before a punishment. She took 2 steps toward me, her heels clicking aggressively on the terrazzo floor. "You do not understand what you have started," she hissed. The sound was low, venomous, meant only for me. "You think you won something? You just humiliated your family in a public record." I stopped. I looked at her, really looked at her. For the first time in months, I saw the fear behind the anger. She was not mad that I had kept the house. She was terrified of what the judge had said about the district attorney. I did not ask her why she did it. I did not ask how she could look me in the eye after trying to make me homeless. Those questions belonged to a daughter who still hoped for love. I was no longer that daughter. I was a plaintiff in training. "I understand exactly what I started," I said to the air in front of me, not turning my head to face her directly. "Fraud leaves a trail, Elaine, and trails lead to charges." I kept walking. I heard her gasp, a sharp intake of breath as if I had slapped her. But I did not look back. I stepped into the waiting elevator and pressed the button for the ground floor. The doors slid shut, cutting off the sight of them standing there, smaller and more desperate than I had ever seen them. I did not go to my car. I went straight to the county recorder's office on the first floor. The stay stopped the eviction, but it did not fix the title, according to the official records of the county. I was still not the owner of my own home. My parents were. I needed to flag that deed before they tried to take out a mortgage against it or sell it to an unsuspecting third party. The line at the recorder's desk was short. I walked up to the counter, where a young man with sleeve tattoos and a meticulously groomed beard was sorting through a stack of liens. He looked up, his expression pleasant but distracted. "Help you?" he asked. "I need to file a fraud notification on a parcel," I said. "And I need to see the intake metadata for a specific document recorded on January 24th. He blinked. "Metadata? We usually just give you the certified copy." "I have the copy," I said, placing the printout of the forged deed on the counter. "I need to know who walked this into the office. I need to know what time it was scanned, and I need you to look at something for me." I pointed to the notary stamp on the bottom of the page. "Look at the commission number." The clerk adjusted his glasses and leaned in. He pulled the document toward him, squinting at the small rectangular stamp that gave the document its legal power. "Commission number 219004, he read. Then he paused. He tilted his head. "Wait, what do you see?" I asked. The second zero, he said, pointing with a pen. It looks like it was stamped over something else, or maybe corrected by hand. See that little tail? It looks like it might have been a 6 that got turned into a 0. Should that have been rejected? I asked. Absolutely, he said, frowning. Any alteration on a notary stamp invalidates the instrument if the scanner picked up a smudge or a correction. The intake clerk should have kicked it back. This is sloppy. It is forged, I said. That is why it is sloppy. The clerk looked at me, the boredom vanishing from his face. He typed the document number into his computer. Let me pull the intake log. January 24th. He clicked a few keys, staring at the screen. Okay, here it is. Recorded at 2:14 in the afternoon. Counter 3. Walk-in service. Who was the presenter? I asked. It says requester. Gordon Nelson. I closed my eyes for a brief second. My father. He had walked into this building, stood in this line, and handed a forged document to a clerk, smiling his charming smile while he stole my future. Can you print that screen? I asked. The one showing the time and the presenter? I am not really supposed to print internal logs, the clerk said, hesitating. Please, I said. I just came from Department 12. Judge Klein granted a stay because of this document. I need this for the next hearing. It proves my father submitted the deed personally. The clerk looked at the desperation in my eyes, then back at the obvious alteration on the stamp. He nodded once, a quick, conspiratorial dip of his chin. I will print the screen as a receipt query. It will show the timestamp and the requester name. The printer whirred. He handed me 2 warm sheets of paper. They were not just data points. They were ammunition. They proved custody. My father could not claim he mailed it in or that a lawyer handled it. He was the one standing at counter 3. I am placing a lock on the title, I said. I want a notification sent to my email if anyone tries to record anything else against this APN. Done, he said, typing rapidly. You will get a ping if so much as a mechanic's lien hits the file. I walked out of the courthouse at 11:30. The sun was high and bright, bleaching the colors out of the world. I drove straight to the hardware store. I did not buy boxes. I bought a high-definition video doorbell with a cloud recording subscription. I bought a set of heavy-duty deadbolts with reinforced strike plates. I bought a new handle set for the front door. I drove home. The silver sedan was not there. The street was quiet. I parked in the driveway and walked to the front door. The very door the deputy had pounded on 5 hours ago. I looked at the old lock. My parents had a key. They had kept a spare for emergencies since the day I moved in. I had never asked for it back because I trusted them. I unlocked the door and went inside. I changed into work clothes, jeans and a flannel shirt. I got my toolbox. For the next 2 hours, I dismantled the physical access points to my life. I unscrewed the old locks, the metal groaning as the screws turned. I installed the new deadbolts, sinking the 3-inch screws deep into the frame. I wired the doorbell camera, syncing it to my phone until I saw the live feed of my porch in crisp 1080 pixel resolution. This was not paranoia. This was fortification. I was not just securing a building. I was drawing a line in the sand. At 4 o'clock, I sat in the living room, watching the dust motes dance in the light. The house felt different. It was no longer a shared family achievement. It was a fortress, and I was the garrison. At 5:45, as the light began to fade into a bruised purple twilight, my phone buzzed. Motion detected at the front door. I opened the app. On the screen, in glowing black and white, I saw the silver sedan parked at the curb. I saw my parents walking up the driveway. My father was carrying a bottle of wine. My mother was holding a casserole dish covered in foil. It was grotesque. They were bringing a peace offering to the scene of the crime. They reached the porch. My father reached for the doorknob. I watched on the screen as he turned it. It was locked. He frowned. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his key. The key I had given him. He slid it into the lock. It stopped halfway. It did not turn. He jiggled it. He pulled it out and tried again. Nothing. The new tumblers rejected him. He looked at my mother. She said something I could not hear through the glass. but the camera picked it up clearly. "She changed them," my mother said. "She actually changed them." My father pounded on the door. It was an angry, authoritative knock, not unlike the deputies. "Haley," he shouted, "open this door. We need to talk." I did not move from the couch. I pressed the microphone button on my phone app. My voice was projected out of the small speaker on the doorbell. Tinny but clear. "Go away," I said. My parents jumped. They looked around, confused, until they spotted the new camera lens glowing blue next to the doorframe. "Haley, stop this nonsense," my father said, leaning into the camera. His face filled the screen, distorted and angry. "We brought dinner. We need to resolve this as a family. You are making a mistake involving the courts." "You sued me," I said through the app. "You involved the courts. I am just finishing what you started." "We were trying to protect the asset," my mother cried out, leaning over his shoulder. "You are not thinking clearly. Open the door so we can explain." "I am recording this," I said. "You are trespassing. If you do not leave, I will call the deputy back. He is the one who told me I have possession." My father's face turned a shade of red that looked black on the night vision camera. "You listen to me," he growled. "You think that little stunt with the badge logs is going to save you? It is not enough." "It was enough for the judge," I replied. "The judge is just being cautious," he scoffed. "But tomorrow we are going to clear this up. The notary is going to testify. She is going to say you were there. She is going to look that judge in the eye and say she watched you sign that deed." I felt a chill. But it was not fear. It was the thrill of a trap snapping shut. He had just confirmed the conspiracy. He was banking on the notary lying for them. He believed that a witness was stronger than data. "Let her testify," I said, my voice cold and steady through the speaker. "Let her say I signed it." "She will," my father threatened, "and then you will be out on the street for perjury." "If she says I signed it," I replied, "then tomorrow she will have to bring her journal." My father paused. "What?" "The notary journal," I said. "Every notary has to keep one. It requires a thumbprint for a deed. If I was there, my thumbprint is in her book. If I wasn't, then what is in that book? Dad?" Silence on the porch. The question hung in the cool evening air. My father stared at the camera lens, and for the first time, I saw the dawn of realization. He had paid for a stamp. He had paid for a signature. But had he paid for a thumbprint? Had they thought that far ahead? "Go home," I said, "before I call the police." My father stared at the camera for one more second, his mouth opening and closing as he tried to find a retort. He found none. He turned around, grabbed my mother by the arm, and marched her back to the car. The casserole dish tilted in her hands, leaking sauce onto the driveway. I watched them drive away on the small screen of my phone. "Bring the journal," I whispered to the empty room. I knew they would try to fix it. I knew they would spend the night calling Sienna Hart, the notary, trying to forge a journal entry to match their lie. But I also knew something they didn't. You cannot fake a thumbprint from 40 miles away. And the more they tried to cover the tracks, the deeper the hole they were digging. I saved the video clip. I named the file thread_at_door.mp4 and uploaded it to the cloud. Then I went to the kitchen, made a sandwich, and sat down to prepare for the notary. The email from the Security Operations Center arrived at 8:15 in the evening. It landed in my inbox with a soft, unassuming chime, a sound that usually signaled a calendar invite or a corporate newsletter, but tonight, that sound was the heavy thud of an anchor hitting the seabed. I sat at my dining room table, which had been transformed into a command center. My laptop was open, casting a blue glow over stacks of paper. I clicked the subject line, Confidential, Access Log Request, Case CV 249901. Mike had come through. I opened the attachment. It was a PDF certification letter signed by the Director of Physical Security at Crestline Analytics, accompanied by 12 pages of raw data logs. I held my breath as I scrolled to the date in question, January 24th. The data was beautiful. It was cold, binary, and absolute. 0702 hours, badge 4429, perimeter gate A, access granted, 0705 hours, badge 4429, lobby turnstile. C, access, granted, 0715 hours, badge 4429, secure lab door. B, access granted. I traced the entries with my finger on the screen. The logs showed every time I moved through the building. They showed me entering the third-floor break room at 10:30 for coffee. They showed me entering the restroom block at 1 o'clock. They showed me swiping back into the server farm at 1:15, and most importantly, they showed absolutely no exit scans between 7 in the morning and 7 in the evening. According to the forged deed my father had recorded, I had appeared before a notary public in a strip mall in Ridge County at 2:14 in the afternoon. I looked at my logs. At 2:14 in the afternoon, my badge had swiped into Conference Room 4, West Wing. That room was behind 2 layers of biometric security. To get from my office to that notary, sign a deed, and get back, I would have needed a helicopter and the ability to walk through walls. I hit reply. Mike, this is perfect. Do we have visuals? 3 minutes later, another email arrived. Large file attachment. I downloaded the zip file. It contained 6 high-definition still images taken from the security footage. The first image showed my car, a gray sedan with my license plate clearly visible, pulling into the company garage at dawn. The second showed me walking through the turnstile, holding a travel mug, wearing a distinctive green trench coat. The timestamp was embedded in the video file. January 24th, 07:05:13 a.m. The final image showed me leaving, looking exhausted, wearing the same coat, at 7:45 in the evening. There was no gap. There was no lunch break trip. There was no mysterious window of time where I could have driven 40 miles to sign away my inheritance. I printed everything. The printer hummed rhythmically, spitting out page after page of my alibi. I held the certified logs in my hands. This was not just a defense. It was a weapon, in a court of law. A notary's word usually carries a presumption of truth, but a certified automated security log from a regulated financial institution? That was the gold standard. I was not done. I wanted another layer. I wanted to bury them under so much proof that they would not be able to breathe. I picked up my phone and opened my location settings. I navigated to the significant locations history on the internal map. It is a feature most people forget exists. A passive tracker that logs where your device stays for extended periods. I scrolled back to January 24th. The map showed a single red dot. Crestline Analytics Group. Arrived, 0701. Departed, 1946. I took a screenshot. Then I opened my timeline on the search engine map app. Same result. A solid blue line from my house to work. A solid block of time at the office, and a solid blue line home. No detours, no stops at a notary office. I printed the screenshots. Now, I had the trinity of evidence: physical security logs, video surveillance, digital geolocation. I cleared a space on the table and began to assemble the timeline. I took a piece of poster board, something I had bought during my supply run, and drew a horizontal line. On top, I wrote in red marker, "The lie." I plotted the time of the deed recording, 14:14 hours. Below the line, I wrote in blue marker, "The truth." I pasted the log entry for 14:14 hours. Location? Conference Room 4. I looked at it. It was simple. It was devastating. Then, my phone buzzed. It was not an email. It was a text message. I looked at the screen. The number was unknown, a local area code, but not one stored in my contacts. I swiped it open. "You think you are clever. You are going to lose a lot more than a house if you don't drop this." I stared at the words. The text was vague enough to be legally ambiguous. It did not explicitly say, "I will hurt you," but specific enough to send a spike of adrenaline through my veins. It was the kind of threat a bully sends when they realize their victim is fighting back. It was designed to make me look over my shoulder, to make me doubt my safety, to make me wonder if the house was worth the danger. My first instinct was to delete it, to erase the toxicity from my life. But I was not Haley the victim anymore. I was Haley the investigator. I took a screenshot immediately. I tapped the info icon on the message and took a screenshot of the number. Then, I forwarded the message to my email. I created a new folder on my laptop titled Intimidation. I dragged the screenshots into it. I typed a new email to myself. Subject line: Case log. Threat received. I wrote a quick memo. Received text from unknown number, 555-0199 at 8:45 p.m. Content implies retaliation for legal action. I printed the email. I punched 3 holes in the paper and added it to the binder. Keep coming, I whispered to the phone. Give me more. Every threat they sent was just another brick in the wall I was building around them. They thought they were scaring me, but they were actually handing me the evidence I would need for a restraining order later. I checked the time. 9 o'clock. I had one more call to make. I needed to be absolutely certain that the machinery of the state had actually stopped turning. I had the judge's order, and I had the deputy's text. But I knew how bureaucracy worked. Papers got lost. Shifts changed. People forgot to update the computer. I dialed the number for the sheriff's civil unit. It was late, but they had a 24-hour dispatch line for eviction verifications. Sheriff's Dispatch, Civil Division, a gruff voice answered. This is Haley Nelson, I said, my voice crisp. I am the defendant in case CV 249901. I was scheduled for a lockout tomorrow at noon. Judge Klein issued a stay of execution today. I am calling to verify that the stay has been entered into your active dispatch system. Hold on, the dispatcher said. I heard the clicking of keys. Nelson, 1224 Maplewood? Yes. I see the writ, he said. Status is active. My heart stopped. Active? It should be recalled. I have a signed order from Judge Klein. Well, the system says active, he said indifferently. Sometimes the clerk doesn't fax it over until the next morning. That is not good enough, I said, my voice hardening. If it says active, a deputy might show up. I need you to update it now. I can email you the order. I cannot take emails from the public, he said. Then look at the notes, I insisted. Deputy Miller was the serving officer. He confirmed receipt of the order at 10:30 this morning. Let me check the unit notes. The dispatcher sighed. He sounded annoyed that I was interrupting his night. There was a long pause. Okay, yeah. Miller put a note in. Stay granted. Do not execute. It just wasn't flagged on the main screen. Can you flag it? I asked. Please, I do not want a squad car in my driveway tomorrow. I will update the status code to hold, he said. You are good. No one is rolling on that address. Thank you, I said. I hung up and let out a breath I felt like I'd been holding for 16 hours. It was a small detail, a clerical error. But if I hadn't called, I might have faced another confrontation. I was learning that in a legal war. You cannot trust the system to work on autopilot. You have to fly the plane yourself. I stood up and walked to the kitchen. I drank a glass of water, forcing myself to hydrate. My body was buzzing with cortisol, wide awake, ready to fight for another 10 hours. But I knew that was dangerous. Exhaustion makes people sloppy. Sloppiness leads to mistakes, and mistakes become the other side's story. I needed to sleep. I went back to the table for one final review. I had bought a fresh, black 3-ring binder. I opened it. Tab 1, the stay, the judge's order, front and center. Tab 2, the fraud, the photo of the forged deed, the intake receipt showing my father as the presenter, and the close-up of the altered notary stamp. Tab 3, the alibi, the certified security logs, the camera stills, and the location history maps. Tab 4, the bad service, the proof of service showing my mother signed it at the wrong address, coupled with my utility bills proving my real residence. Tab 5, the threat, the screenshot of the text message. It was a packet of pure, distilled truth. It was heavy. It was organized. It was undeniable. I closed the binder. I put it in my tote bag and placed the bag by the front door. Next to my keys, I checked the locks one last time. I checked the camera feed on my phone. The street was empty. I went into my bedroom and laid out my clothes for the morning. I chose a navy blue blazer, a white blouse, and tailored trousers. I did not want to look like a victim. I did not want to look like a creative homeowner. I wanted to look like a professional. I wanted to look like the kind of person who keeps spreadsheets for fun and does not forge legal documents. I lay down in bed. The house was quiet. For the first time in 5 years, the silence didn't feel peaceful. It felt charged, like the air before a thunderstorm. I closed my eyes. I visualized the courtroom. I visualized the notary. I visualized the look on my father's face when I produced the security logs. I did not count sheep. I counted timestamps: 0702, 0715, 1414. I fell asleep with the numbers marching through my head like soldiers. The alarm went off at 6 o'clock. I did not hit snooze. I was up, showered, and dressed by 6:30. I drank coffee standing up in the kitchen, watching the camera feed. No silver sedan. I grabbed the tote bag. It felt heavier than yesterday, but it was a good weight. I walked out the door, locking the new deadbolt with a satisfying click. I got into my car. The morning air was crisp, the sky a pale, indifferent blue. I drove to the courthouse. I parked in the same structure, but I did not run this time. I walked. I walked with the binder tucked under my arm. When I entered the lobby, the security guards nodded at me. I was becoming a regular. I went through the metal detector, my bag sliding through the X-ray machine. The binder appeared on the monitor as a dense, rectangular block. I took the elevator to the 3rd floor. I walked down the long hallway to Department 12. The doors were open. I walked in. The room was buzzing with the low murmur of pre-session chatter. My parents were there. They were sitting in the front row again, huddled with Mr. Vance. My mother looked tired. Her makeup was a little heavier today. Trying to hide the stress, my father looked agitated. He was whispering forcefully to Mr. Vance, gesturing with his hands, and then I saw her. Sitting on the bench behind them was a woman I did not know, but I recognized her fear. She was clutching a large, fake leather purse on her lap with both hands. She was wearing a scarf that seemed designed to hide her neck, and her eyes were darting around the room like a trapped animal. Sienna Hart, the notary. She was here. My parents had actually brought her. I felt a surge of cold satisfaction. They had doubled down. They were going to try to bluff their way through the perjury. They thought that by bringing a live witness, they could overpower my denial. They thought it was going to be her word against mine. I walked to the defendant's table and set my binder down with a deliberate thud. My father looked up. He saw me. He saw the binder. He saw the calm, flat expression on my face. He narrowed his eyes, trying to read me, trying to see if the threat text had worked. I did not look at him. I looked at the notary. I caught her eye for a brief second. She looked away immediately, staring down at her shoes. I sat down and opened my binder to tab 3. I smoothed the page with the security logs. "All rise," the bailiff shouted. Judge Klein entered the room. She looked fresh, sharp, and ready to work. She took her seat and adjusted her microphone. "Calling the matter of Nelson versus Nelson," she said. "We are here for an evidentiary hearing on the status of the default judgment and the claim of title fraud." "Ready for the plaintiff," Mr. Vance said. "Ready for the defendant," I said. "Ms. Nelson," the judge said, looking at me. "You claimed yesterday you had proof that the deed was a forgery, and Mr. Vance, you claimed you had a valid witness." "We do, Your Honor," Vance said, gesturing to the woman behind him. "We have the notary public present." "Good," the judge said. "And Ms. Nelson?" "I have the proof, Your Honor," I said, placing my hand on the binder. "Then let's begin," the judge said. "Swear in the witness." I watched Sienna Hart stand up. She was shaking. She was about to walk into a buzzsaw of digital evidence, and she didn't even know it. I almost felt sorry for her, Almost. But then I remembered the eviction notice on my door, and the pity evaporated. I uncapped my pen. The trap was set. Now. I just had to wait for them to step into it. The air in Department 12 was recycled, cold, and smelled faintly of floor wax and fear. It was a smell I had grown used to over the last 24 hours, but for the people sitting in the front row, it seemed to be choking them. I sat at the defendant's table, my spine pressed against the hard wood of the chair, my hands resting on top of my black binder. I watched them come in. My parents had treated this hearing like a costume party. Yesterday, they had played the role of the concerned, weary family. Today, they had dressed for a coronation. My father, Gordon, wore a charcoal suit that was sharper and more expensive than the one he had worn yesterday. It was a suit that said, "Authority." My mother, Elaine, had abandoned the soft, tragic cardigan for a structured blazer in a pale, non-threatening cream color. She wore a strand of pearls. Pearls I knew were fake. Much like the deed they were defending, they moved with a stiffness that betrayed them. They walked down the center aisle not with the confidence of owners, but with the rigidity of people walking a tightrope. They did not look at me. They sat down at the plaintiff's table, leaning in close to Mr. Vance, their attorney. Vance looked less confident today. He was arranging his papers with a little too much precision. Shuffling the same stack 3 times, he knew the judge was already skeptical. He knew he was walking onto a minefield, but my eyes did not stay on my parents. They drifted to the woman sitting on the bench directly behind them. Sienna Hart. She was the variable. She was the ghost in the machine. She did not look like a conspirator. She looked like a woman who was regretting every life choice that had led her to this room. She was young, perhaps in her late 20s, with hair pulled back in a messy ponytail that she had tried to tidy up with too many clips. She wore a blouse that was slightly too large for her and black slacks. She was clutching a large, battered fake leather purse on her lap, her knuckles white as she gripped the straps. She looked like she was holding on to a flotation device in a storm. She was not looking at the judge. She was not looking at the lawyers. She was staring at the floor, her legs bouncing in a nervous, rapid rhythm that shook the bench she was sitting on. Every few seconds, her eyes would dart toward my father's back, a look of desperate dependence. She was terrified. I felt a strange, cold pity for her. My parents were predators. They used people. They had likely charmed her, paid her a few $100s, told her it was just a family formality to help their daughter, and convinced her that bending the rules was harmless. Now, she was sitting in a superior courtroom, about to realize that harmless in the eyes of the law is a very different thing than harmless in a strip mall notary shop. The side door opened. "All rise," the bailiff bellowed, his voice bouncing off the high ceiling. Judge Maren Klein swept in. She moved with a kinetic energy that commanded the room. She did not look at the files. She did not adjust her robe. She sat down, looked straight at the plaintiff's table, and then straight at me. Her expression was neutral, but her eyes were sharp. She was a woman who had heard every lie ever invented, and she had no patience for hearing them twice. "Be seated," she said. The room settled into a heavy silence. The court reporter's fingers hovered over her machine. "We are back on the record in the matter of Nelson versus Nelson," Judge Klein announced. "Yesterday, this court issued a stay of execution based on a credible claim of title fraud and improper service. Today, we are here to determine if the default judgment should be vacated permanently and if this matter should be referred for criminal investigation." The words criminal investigation hung in the air like smoke. I saw my mother flinch. It was a small movement, just a tightening of her shoulders, but I saw it. "Mr. Vance," the judge said, turning her gaze to the attorney, "you insisted yesterday that the quitclaim deed recorded on January 24th is valid. You stated you had the notary public present to testify." "Mr." Vance stood up. He buttoned his jacket. "Yes, Your Honor. The plaintiffs maintain that the deed was validly executed. We have brought Ms. Sienna Hart, the commissioning notary, to verify her acknowledgement." "Good," Judge Klein said. She did not ask him to call the witness to the stand yet. She leaned forward, resting her elbows on the bench. Before we get to testimony, I want to see the physical evidence. Counsel, hand up the original quitclaim deed. Not a copy. The wet ink original. Mr. Vance hesitated. Your Honor, the original was returned to the plaintiffs after recording. We have a certified copy. I did not ask for a copy. Judge Klein interrupted. Her voice was quiet, dangerous. This is a hearing on forgery. I need to see the paper. Do you have it? My father reached into his briefcase. He pulled out a document in a blue legal backing. He handed it to Mr. Vance, who walked it up to the bailiff. The bailiff handed it to the judge. Judge Klein took the deed. She put on her reading glasses. She ran her finger over the signature line. She held the paper up to the light, looking at the indentations of the pen. And, the judge continued, not looking up from the paper, I want the notary journal. The room went dead silent. Mr. Vance stiffened. The journal? The notary journal, Judge Klein repeated. She took off her glasses and looked at him. Every notary in this state is required by law to keep a sequential journal of all official acts. If this deed was notarized, there is an entry. I want to see it. Immediately. Mr. Vance looked back at my parents. My father looked at Sienna. Sienna looked like she was about to be sick. Your Honor. Mr. Vance tried. The journal is the personal property of the notary. It contains private information regarding other clients. We believe— I do not care what you believe. Counsel, Judge Klein snapped. Sit down. She pointed a finger at Sienna Hart. Ms. Hart, the judge said. Come forward. Bring your purse. Sienna froze. She looked at my father, her eyes wide with panic. My father gave a barely perceptible nod, a gesture that said, It is fine, just go. But his face was pale. Sienna stood up. Her legs were shaky. She walked through the swinging gate of the bar, clutching her purse to her chest. She stood before the bench, looking small and terrified. Do you have your journal with you? The judge asked. Yes, Your Honor, Sienna whispered. Her voice was thin, barely a scratch in the air. Take it out, the judge ordered. Sienna unzipped her purse. Her hands were trembling so badly that she fumbled with the zipper. It made a loud, rasping sound in the quiet room. She reached in and pulled out a black, hard-bound book. It looked like a standard ledger. Hand it to the bailiff, the judge said. Sienna handed the book to the bailiff. The bailiff handed it to the judge. Judge Klein opened the book. She flipped through the pages. Flip, flip, flip. The sound was rhythmic, hypnotic. She stopped near the end of the used pages. She ran her finger down a column. January 24th, the judge read aloud. She looked at the entry. She studied it for a long time. The silence stretched, tight as a drum skin. I could hear the hum of the ventilation system. I could hear my own heart beating in my ears. Mr. Vance, the judge said, not looking up. The entry here lists a quitclaim deed. The signer is listed as Haley Nelson. As we stated, Your Honor. Mr. Vance said, trying to sound vindicated. Mrs. Hart, the judge said to the notary, in this column for identification, you have written C, a driver's license. Is that correct? Yes, Sienna squeaked. Yes, Your Honor. And you verified the photo against the person standing in front of you? Yes. And you verified the license number? Yes. Read the number you wrote down, the judge commanded. She turned the book around and pushed it toward the edge of the bench so Sienna could see. Sienna leaned in. She squinted. It says DL44892015. Judge Klein pulled the book back. She looked at me. Ms. Nelson, she said. I stood up. I knew what was coming. I had memorized my license number when I was 16. It was part of my identity, like my social security number or my birthday. State your driver's license number for the record, Judge Klein said. DL, I began. My voice clear and projecting to the back of the room. 517-36690. The numbers hung in the air. They did not match. They did not even come close. The number in the book started with a 4. My number started with a 5. The number in the book ended in 15. Mine ended in 90. It was not a typo. It was not a transposition of 2 digits. It was a completely different string of integers. The room shifted. You could feel the physical change in the atmosphere. The tension did not explode. It deflates. It was the sound of a balloon losing all its air at once. The lie, which had been inflated with so much bluster and arrogance, just collapsed on the floor. Mister? Vance closed his eyes for a brief second. He knew. In that moment, he knew his clients had lied to him. He knew he was standing in front of a judge with a perjured witness and a fraudulent document. He stepped away from the table, putting a few inches of distance between himself and my parents. It was a subtle move, a survival instinct. My father did not move. He stared at the judge, his face frozen in a rictus of shock. He had assumed that simply writing a number, any number, would be enough. He thought the court system was a rubber stamp. He thought no one checked the digits. Judge Klein looked at the journal. Then she looked at the copy of my license I had submitted yesterday. "The numbers do not match," the judge said. Her voice was devoid of emotion now. It was the voice of a surgeon declaring a time of death. "They are not even from the same series." She looked at Sienna Hart. The notary was shaking so hard now that I thought she might faint. She was gripping the railing of the witness stand. "Ms. Hart," the judge said, "this is a court of law. You are under oath. Do you understand what perjury is?" "Yes," Sienna whispered. Tears were starting to spill down her cheeks, ruining the makeup she had applied to look professional. "You wrote a number in this book," the judge said. "It is a fake number. It does not belong to the defendant." Sienna stammered. She looked back at my parents. My mother was staring at her lap. My father was looking at the wall, refusing to make eye contact. They had abandoned her. They had thrown her into the fire and stepped back to watch her burn. "Look at me," Judge Klein ordered. Her voice cracked like a whip. Sienna jerked her head back to the judge. "I am going to ask you one question," Judge Klein said. She leaned forward, her eyes locking onto the terrified young woman. "And the answer to this question will determine whether you walk out of this courtroom or whether you are taken into custody by the bailiff." The threat was real. The bailiff shifted his stance, moving his hand closer to his belt. "Did you," the judge asked, enunciating every syllable, "witness Haley Nelson sign this deed in your presence?" The question hung there. It was the only question that mattered. It cut through the fake lease, the bad service, the timeline, and the lies. It was the binary core of the case, yes or no. Sienna looked at me. For the first time, she really saw me. She saw the woman whose house she had helped steal. She saw the binder on my table. She saw that I was not unstable. I was standing tall. I was the only person in the room who wasn't lying to her or using her. She looked at the binder. She looked at the security logs I had left open on the table, the black bars of data visible even from where she stood. She realized I could prove where I was. She realized that if she lied now, if she said yes, she would be walked into a jail cell because my evidence would bury her. My parents had told her I was crazy. They had told her I wouldn't fight. They had told her it was easy. She looked back at the judge. Her lip quivered. She took a breath, a ragged, hitching sound that echoed in the silent courtroom. The silence stretched. 1 second, 2 seconds, 3 seconds. "No," she whispered. The word was soft, but it landed with the force of a gavel strike. "Mister." Vance sat down heavily in his chair. My mother let out a small, strangled sound. My father closed his eyes. "I'm sorry," Judge Klein said, leaning in. "I didn't hear you." Sienna looked up, tears streaming freely now. She let go of the railing. She looked exhausted, broken, but relieved. "No," she said, louder this time. "I didn't witness it. She wasn't there." The room erupted into a low buzz of whispers. but Judge Klein slammed her gavel down once. Bang! Quiet, she ordered. She looked at Sienna. Who brought you the deed? Sienna pointed a shaking finger at the plaintiff's table. She pointed directly at my father. He did, she said. Mr. Nelson? He came in alone. He told me his daughter was sick. He said she was in the car. He said she had already signed it and just needed the stamp. He offered me $500 to just stamp it. And you stamped it? The judge asked. I needed the money, Sienna sobbed. I'm sorry. I didn't know he was stealing it. Judge Klein sat back. She took off her glasses. She looked at my parents with an expression of pure, unadulterated disgust. It was the look a person gives to something they found on the bottom of their shoe. The court record will reflect, Judge Klein said, her voice icy, that the witness has admitted to falsifying a notarial act at the direction of the plaintiff. She turned to me. Ms. Nelson, she said, you can sit down. You have done enough. I sat down. My legs felt like jelly, but I kept my face composed. I did not smile. I did not cheer. I just closed my binder. The sound of the 3 rings snapping shut was the only applause I needed. The trap had worked. They had walked right into it, arrogant and blind, and now the jaws had snapped shut. Mr. Vance, the judge said to the lawyer, you have a problem. I am aware, Your Honor, Vance said, his voice hollow. He began to pack his briefcase. He was already mentally drafting his withdrawal motion. He wanted off this ship before it sank completely. Bailiff, Judge Klein said, secure the courtroom. No one leaves until I say so. My father looked at the door. For a second, I thought he might run, but he just slumped in his chair. A man whose entire world of manipulation had just collided with the hard, immovable wall of the truth. I watched them. I watched the people who had raised me, the people who had claimed to love me, as they realized that the unstable daughter had just outsmarted them. The hearing was over, but the consequences were just beginning. Yes, the word hung in the air, thin and brittle, like a dead leaf about to crumble. Sienna Hart did not say it with conviction. She did not say it with the righteous certainty of a witness defending the truth. She whispered it, her voice trembling so violently that the microphone on the witness stand barely picked it up. Yes, she repeated, slightly louder this time, as if trying to convince herself. I witnessed Haley Nelson sign the deed. But as she spoke, her eyes did not stay on the judge. For a fraction of a second, a micro-movement that might have been invisible to anyone not looking for it, her gaze flicked toward the plaintiff's table. She looked at my parents. It was a reflex, a desperate check-in with her handlers to ensure she had delivered the line correctly. My father, Gordon, remained motionless, staring straight ahead. My mother, Elaine, let out a soft exhale, her shoulders dropping half an inch. They thought they had survived the impact. They thought that because the word yes had been spoken into the record, the reality of the situation had bent to their will. They believed that the spoken lie was more powerful than the silent truth. I sat perfectly still. I did not gasp. I did not object. I felt a cold, hard satisfaction settle in my chest. They had done it. They had crossed the line from a family dispute into a felony. They had walked into the trap I had spent 24 hours building, and now the door was about to slam shut. Judge Klein did not write the answer down. She stared at Sienna Hart over the rim of her glasses. The judge had seen the eye flick. She had heard the tremble. She looked from the notary to the journal, then to me. You witnessed it, Judge Klein repeated, her tone neutral but sharp. On January 24th, at 2:14 in the afternoon, in Ridge County. Yes, Your Honor, Sienna said, clutching her purse tighter. Ms. Nelson, the judge said, turning her attention to me. You stated you had evidence regarding your location. I do, Your Honor, I said. I stood up, picking up my black binder. I would like to direct the court's attention to tab 3. These are certified access logs from my employer, Crestline Analytics Group. I walked to the bailiff and handed him the binder. He walked it up to the bench. Mr. Vance, the attorney for my parents, stood up. "Objection," Vance said, though his voice lacked energy. "We have not authenticated these records. They are accompanied by a sworn certification from the Director of Security. Pursuant to the Evidence Code," I countered, my voice steady. "They are self-authenticating business records." Judge Klein waved Vance down. "I can read a certification. Counsel, sit down." The judge opened the binder. The room went silent. The only sound was the rustle of paper as she turned the pages. I watched her eyes scan the rows of data I had highlighted in neon yellow. "Ms. Hart," Judge Klein said, not looking up from the binder, "you swore under oath that the defendant was in your office in Ridge County at 2:14 p.m. on January 24th. "Yes," Sienna said. "According to these logs," the judge said, her voice dropping an octave. "Ms. Nelson swiped her security badge to enter a secured conference room at Crestline Analytics, 40 miles away from your office, at exactly 2:14 p.m., the judge looked up. "How do you explain that?" Sienna blinked. She opened her mouth, but no sound came out. She looked at Mr. Vance. Vance stood up again, buttoning and unbuttoning his jacket. "Your Honor, clocks vary. It is possible there was a discrepancy between the notary's wall clock and the security system. A few minutes either way." 40 miles. "Counsel," Judge Klein interrupted, "even if we allow for a generous margin of error on the clocks, the defendant would need to travel through rush hour traffic. The logs show her entering the building at 7:02 in the morning." "Maybe she left for lunch," Vance tried. "Maybe she slipped out." "I am looking at the exit logs right now," Judge Klein said, flipping the page. "There are none. In fact, I'm looking at a parking gate scan. Ms. Nelson's vehicle, license plate matching the one on file, entered the garage at 7:05 a.m. and did not trigger an exit scan until 1946. That is 7:46 at night." The judge turned the binder around so the gallery could see the graph I had created. The blue line of my presence at work was unbroken. The red dot of the alleged notarization sat right in the middle of it, an impossible anomaly. "Unless your client has the ability to teleport," Judge Klein said dryly. "She was inside a secured financial facility at the exact moment this witness claims she was signing a deed in a strip mall." My father shifted in his seat. He whispered something to Vance. Vance shook his head. A sharp, angry motion. The attorney was realizing he had been sent into battle with a wooden sword. "It could be a clerical error," Vance said, trying one last, desperate pivot. "Perhaps the notary wrote the wrong date. Maybe it was the 23rd or the 25th. People make mistakes in journals." "A clerical error?" Judge Klein repeated. She looked at the journal again. "You are suggesting that a state-commissioned officer not only got the ID number wrong, as we established earlier, but also wrote down the wrong date, the wrong time, and the wrong thumbprint?" "It is possible," Vance insisted. "Notaries are human. Not at this scale," Judge Klein said. "This is not a typo. This is a fabrication." She turned back to Sienna. The notary was sweating now. I could see a sheen of perspiration on her forehead under the fluorescent lights. "Let's look closer at this journal," the judge said. She pulled the black book toward her again, opening it back to the page in question. "Ms. Nelson pointed out that the driver's license number was incorrect, but let's look at the other columns." The judge ran her finger across the page. "The column for signature of signer, that is a scribble. It looks nothing like the signature on the deed itself." She moved her finger again. "And the column for thumbprint, in a real estate transaction involving a deed. A thumbprint is mandatory in this county. Ms. Hart, look at this entry." Sienna leaned forward, terrified. "There is a smudge here," the judge said, "but it is not a thumbprint. It looks like ink that was wiped with a tissue." "The ink pad was dry," Sienna stammered. "It didn't take well." "So you have no biometric verification," Judge Klein summarized. "No correct ID number, an impossible timestamp, and a witness who was 40 miles away." The judge stopped. Her eyes narrowed. She had seen something else in the book. She leaned in closer. bringing the journal up to her face. "Wait," the judge said. "There is a signature in the witness column." I felt a surge of adrenaline. This was the card I had held back. I knew it was there because I had suspected my parents were arrogant enough to use someone they trusted. Someone who was part of the family, but not legally related. To act as the witness, "Ms. Hart?" the judge asked. "Who is this person? The signature is legible. Thomas Redfield?" Sienna froze. "He was the witness. He came in with Mr. Nelson." "Thomas Redfield," Judge Klein repeated. She looked at the plaintiff's table. "Mr. Vance, is that name familiar to you?" Vance looked at my father. My father had gone the color of ash. He was staring at the table. His jaw clenched so tight I could see the muscle jumping in his cheek. "I am not sure, Your Honor," Vance lied. "I can clarify, Your Honor," I said. The judge looked at me. "Go ahead, Ms. Nelson." "Thomas Redfield is the Chief Financial Officer of Nelson Supply Logistics," I said clearly. "That is my father's company. He has worked for my father for 20 years. The room rippled with a low murmur. This was no longer just a notary doing a favor. This was a conspiracy involving employees. "And," I added, pulling a folded piece of paper from my pocket, "if the court looks at the intake metadata from the county recorder's office, which I obtained yesterday, you will see who actually submitted the deed for recording." I unfolded the paper, the receipt the clerk had printed for me yesterday. "The deed was not mailed," I said. "It was a walk-in recording. The requester listed on the intake receipt is not my father. It is Thomas Redfield." I handed the paper to the bailiff. Judge Klein took it. She compared the name on the receipt to the name in the journal. "So," the judge said, her voice dangerously quiet. "Let me get the timeline straight. Mr. Redfield, an employee of the plaintiff, goes to the notary with the plaintiff. They produce a deed. They coerce or pay the notary to stamp it without the signer present. Then Mr. Redfield drives the fraudulent document to the recorder's office and files it personally." She looked at my parents. They were shrinking in their seats. My mother had her hand over her mouth. My father looked like he was trying to calculate if he could make it to the exit before the bailiff stopped him. "This is not a landlord-tenant dispute," Judge Klein said. "This is a criminal conspiracy. You have involved a third party. You have utilized a notary to falsify public records, and you have submitted those records to a government agency." She turned back to Sienna Hart. The notary was sobbing now, silent, shaking sobs. She realized that she was the weak link in a chain that was being pulled tight around everyone's neck. She realized that Thomas Redfield wasn't here. My father wasn't under oath. She was the one sitting in the chair. She was the one holding the bag. "Ms. Hart," Judge Klein said, "I am going to give you one chance, just one. The penalty for perjury in a capital case or a case involving significant fraud can be prison time. The penalty for notary fraud is immediate revocation of your commission and potential criminal charges." The judge leaned over the bench. She looked like a hawk staring down a field mouse. "I have logs that say she wasn't there. I have a journal that is full of fake numbers. I have a witness signature that ties back to the plaintiff's payroll." "Ms. Hart," the judge said, her voice slowing down, becoming colder and heavier with every syllable. "I want you to look at the defendant. Look at Haley Nelson." Sienna turned her tear-streaked face toward me. I met her gaze. I did not look angry anymore. I just looked waiting. I was the person who had the truth on my side, and we both knew it. "Now look at me," the judge commanded. Sienna turned back to the bench. "Did you," the judge asked, "witness Haley Nelson sign this deed?" The courtroom held its breath. Even the air conditioning seemed to stop. "Mr. Vance had his head in his hands. My parents were staring at the notary with a mixture of hatred and terror, silently willing her to keep lying, to stick to the script, but the script had burned up. Sienna's lips parted. She looked at my parents one last time, and I saw the moment the loyalty broke. She realized they could not save her. They could not even save themselves. The silence stretched, agonizing and absolute, as the truth prepared to tear the room apart. "No, I didn't witness it." The words were barely a whisper, but in the acoustic vacuum of Department 12, they landed with the seismic force of a gavel strike before the gavel even hit the wood. Sienna Hart, the notary public, slumped forward in the witness stand, her face buried in her hands, her shoulders heaving with the release of a burden she had never been strong enough to carry. The silence that followed was absolute. It was the sound of a carefully constructed reality shattering into 1,000 irreparable pieces. Judge Maren Klein did not look surprised. She looked vindicated. She slowly closed the notary journal and placed her hand on top of it, claiming it as evidence of the court. She turned her gaze to the plaintiff's table. Mr. Vance, the attorney who had walked in with such confidence 48 hours ago, was now actively packing his briefcase. He was moving with the frantic, jerky motions of a man trying to evacuate a burning building before the roof collapsed. My parents, however, were frozen. My father, Gordon, stared at Sienna with a look of betrayal that was so profound it was almost comical. He truly believed that his money and his influence should have bought her silence. He could not comprehend that the truth, when pressurized by the threat of prison, is stronger than a $500 bribe. My mother, Elaine, simply looked down at her hands, her face draining of color until she looked like a wax figure melting under the heat of the lights. "The record will reflect," Judge Klein said, her voice booming through the courtroom, "that the witness has recanted her notarization. She has admitted under oath that the defendant, Haley Nelson, was not present for the signing of the quitclaim deed." The judge picked up her pen. She did not write. She slashed across the paper in front of her. "The default judgment entered last week is hereby vacated," she declared. "The writ of possession is dissolved immediately. The eviction case is dismissed with prejudice. That means it is over. You do not get to refile this. You do not get to fix the paperwork and try again." "Your Honor, if we could just explain," my father started, rising halfway out of his chair. His voice was ragged, desperate. "The intent was—" "Sit down. Mr. Nelson," Judge Klein barked. She did not shout often, which made the volume of her voice terrifying. "You do not get to speak. You do not get to explain intent. When you have committed fraud on this court," she turned to the clerk. "Madam Clerk, prepare a minute order immediately. I am making a judicial finding that the quitclaim deed recorded on January 24th is void ab initio. It is a fraudulent instrument." Then, the judge turned her eyes to the bailiff. "Bailiff, take custody of the notary journal. I am referring this matter to the Secretary of State's Notary Division for immediate investigation and revocation of commission." Sienna let out a sob, but the judge was not done. She looked at my father, her eyes cold and hard as flint. "And I am referring this entire file, including the testimony regarding Mr. Thomas Redfield and the falsified intake records, to the District Attorney's Office for investigation into conspiracy, forgery, and filing false public documents. This is no longer a civil matter. It is a crime scene." "Your Honor, please," my mother cried out, finally finding her voice. Tears were streaming down her face, ruining the expensive powder she had applied to look like a victim. "We are her parents. We were just trying to protect the family asset. You cannot send us to jail over a house." "I am not sending you to jail," Judge Klein said, leaning forward. "I am sending the evidence to the people who will—" "You tried to weaponize this court to steal a home from your own daughter. You tried to make her homeless using my signature. You do not get to rewrite this in my courtroom." She slammed the gavel down. Bang. "Case dismissed. Ms. Nelson, approach the bench." I stood up. My legs felt light, as if gravity had suddenly decided to be kind to me. I walked to the bench. The judge looked down at me. The harshness in her eyes softened. Just for a moment. "Ms. Nelson, the clerk is printing a certified copy of my order right now," she said. "It declares the deed void. Do not go home. Do not go to lunch. Go directly downstairs to the county recorder. Record this order immediately. It will override the fake deed and restore your title on the spot." "I will, Your Honor," I said. "Thank you." "And Ms. Nelson?" she added, lowering her voice. "Change your locks again. Way ahead of you. Judge," I took the certified document from the clerk. It had a gold seal embossed on the bottom. It felt warm in my hands. I turned around and walked back to my table to collect my binder. My parents were still sitting there. Mr. Vance had already fled, slipping out the side door the moment the gavel hit. My father looked up at me as I packed my security logs. His eyes were red, rimmed with exhaustion and fury. "You happy?" he rasped. "You destroyed the family for a piece of real estate. You think you won? You have no one now." I zipped up my bag. I looked at him, and I felt absolutely nothing. The fear was gone. The guilt was gone. All that was left was the clarity of a balance sheet that had finally been reconciled. "I didn't destroy the family, Dad," I said quietly. "I just audited it." I walked out of the courtroom. I did not look back. I took the elevator down to the first floor. Moving with a purpose that parted the crowd in the lobby, I went straight to the recorder's office. The same clerk with the sleeve tattoos was there. He saw me coming, saw the gold seal on the paper in my hand, and he smiled. "You got it?" he said. "I got it," I replied, sliding the court order under the glass. "Judge Klein declared the deed void. I need to record this. Restoration of title." He stamped it, recorded. The sound was the most beautiful music I had ever heard. "You are the owner of record again," he said. "The fraud alert is still active. If they try anything else, you will know before the ink is dry." I walked out to the parking lot and sat in my car. It was over. The house was mine. But I had one more piece of business. I pulled out my phone and dialed the sheriff's civil unit. "Deputy Miller?" the voice answered. "It is Haley Nelson," I said. "I am at the courthouse. The case has been dismissed with prejudice. The writ is dissolved." "I heard," the deputy said. "Word travels fast. The judge tore them apart, huh?" "She did," I said. "I just wanted to make sure it is out of your system. I don't want any surprises at 6 o'clock tomorrow morning." "It is gone, Ms. Nelson," he assured me. "The file is closed. No one is coming to your door. Go home." I hung up. I opened my email app. I found the screenshot of the threat text. "You are going to lose a lot more than a house," and the video file of my father pounding on my door. I forwarded them to the court filing portal. I filled out the petition for a permanent restraining order. I was not doing it out of spite. I was doing it because a cornered animal bites, and my parents were currently cornered. I needed a legal force field around me. I typed in the narrative, attaching the judge's findings of fraud as evidence of their willingness to harm me. I hit submit. Then, I drove to the office of my grandfather's estate attorney. I had made an appointment earlier that morning, a hunch gnawing at the back of my mind. My grandfather was a man of details. He had built a steel business from scrap. He didn't trust easily, and he knew his son, my father, better than anyone. The attorney, Mr. Henderson, was an old man with a messy office that smelled of pipe tobacco. He welcomed me in, looking grave. "I heard about the lawsuit," he said, shifting a stack of files. "Your grandfather feared something like this might happen. That is why he wrote the trust the way he did." "I know he left me the house," I said. "But what about the rest? The liquid assets? My parents always talked about their future inheritance like it was a paycheck waiting to clear." "Mr." Henderson pulled a thick document from a safe behind his desk. He adjusted his spectacles. "Your grandfather included a specific clause," he said, flipping to page 42. He called it the bad faith trigger. It is a form of a no-contest clause, but more aggressive. He turned the document toward me. "If any beneficiary attempts to alter, challenge, or seize any asset distributed to another beneficiary through the use of fraud, forgery, or deceit, their entire interest in the residual trust shall be immediately terminated." I read the words twice. "What does that mean?" I asked. my heart pounding. It means, Mr. Henderson said, sitting back, that by forging a deed to steal your house, your parents triggered this clause. They have forfeited their right to the rest of the estate. The stocks, the bonds, the cash reserves, everything they were waiting for to fund their retirement is gone. Where does it go? I asked. The clause specifies a contingent beneficiary. Mr. Henderson said. He smiled, a dry, dusty smile. The Ridge County Affordable Housing Trust, a charity that helps people avoid eviction. I laughed. I couldn't help it. A laugh bubbled up from my chest, loud and uncontainable. My grandfather, from beyond the grave, had set a trap that was even more elegant than mine. In their greed to steal one house, my parents had lost a fortune, and that fortune was now going to help the very people they looked down on. They don't know yet, do they? I asked. I will be sending them a letter this afternoon. Mr. Henderson said, attached to a copy of the court's finding of fraud. I left the office and drove home. The sun was setting, casting long golden shadows across the lawn. I pulled into the driveway. The house looked different. It wasn't just a building anymore. It was a monument to survival. I walked to the front door. I unlocked the new heavy-duty deadbolt. I stepped inside. The silence was different now. It wasn't empty. It was peaceful. I walked to the kitchen and made myself a cup of tea. I sat at the table where I had planned my defense. I looked at the black binder, now closed. My phone buzzed. It was a notification from the doorbell camera. Person detected. I checked the feed. It wasn't my parents. It was a delivery driver, dropping off a package. I watched him walk away. I was safe. My parents had lost everything. They had lost the house. They had lost the money. They had lost their reputation. And most of all, they had lost the narrative. They could no longer tell the story of the unstable daughter. The court record was public. The fraud was documented. Anyone who searched their names would see exactly who they were. I took the certified court order and walked to the hallway closet. I opened the biometric safe. I placed the order inside, right next to the original deed and the estate letters. I locked it. I had learned the lesson my parents had tried to weaponize against me. They thought institutions were hammers to crush the weak. They forgot that institutions are also shields for those who keep the receipts. I sipped my tea, watching the twilight settle over the neighborhood. I was alone, but I wasn't lonely. I was the owner of record, in fee simple, absolute. And for the first time in my life, the locks on the door were there to keep the bad things out, not to lock me in with them. Thank you so much for listening to my story. It was a long journey from that knock on the door at 6 a.m. to the final gavel strike, and I'm glad you stuck with me through the evidence and the courtroom drama. I would love to know where you are tuning in from today. Are you listening on your commute, while cooking dinner, or maybe relaxing at home? Please leave a comment below and let me know your location and what you thought of the twist with the grandfather's trust. If you enjoyed this story and want to hear more revenge drama and justice being served, please make sure to subscribe to the Lily Revenge Stories channel. Hit that like button if you think my parents got what they deserved. And please smash that hype button to help this video get recommended to more people so the story can be heard by everyone. Stay safe, keep your records organized, and I will see you in the next story.